Hi John, this is Matthew Walsh, and this is my CA for um, distributed games programming. The game is called A New Rain. So the game will um, cater to all players across the board, casual, hardcore, and social. The setting is a fictional world suited for RPG and text-based games, free roam style play. So, uh, medieval style world uh, typical of MERP, D&D, or similar to the game. The way they've laid it out is to the game Dark Souls, which you'll see from the map. There are two types of special players. So we have the admin, which will be the first player to log on at any given session, and the god players, which are predefined as to who is a god, and only other god players can make new god players. So then we'll look at the map. It's a 9-room map. The boss fights, so you can see the dragon boss fight, king's boss fight, corrupt deity boss fight, and demon boss fight. These are special areas. So is the starting area in the middle, which is the shopkeeper and level up area, which I'll get to later. So we have the player attributes: health, strength, agility, intellect. Uh, all sub all sub assets of the player are calculated from these four stats. So we have the attack damage, magic damage, a critical strike chance, etc. A bit of pseudocode to show how these different stats will be worked out and calculated. A new attribute I would like to add is the threat attribute. So the higher your threat is, the more likely a boss will focus you. So this is to work in the favor of a tank in the event of multiple players in the same room or in a party. So the higher your threat is, which is based on your damage and whether your character has the ability to taunt the boss or the enemy. So then we have character creation. You'll be able to select a race and role, select your name, etc., and dictate your base stats. Different races will also have different special items they'll receive, which are going to be based on random rolls, which we'll see in a second. So then we just have this UML diagram. So we have our log on, where the player can choose new users or existing users. If you're a new user, you enter your name, password. It'll then check to see if your name is valid. If it's not valid, then cycle again, ask them again. If it's fine, then add the user and go to the game loop. If it's an existing player, enter your name, check your name, enter your password, check your password, and then move to the game loop. So we've got different races the player can choose from, which will dictate their stats and also different roles. Special items. So special items could include extra stat points, special weapons, special armors, etc. These are going to be based off of a list, and the list of rewards will come from specific dice rolls. So the player will randomly roll, which is just a command roll function, and will generate them a random number, and that random number will let them receive a random item. Players will then distribute 18 points to the stats that they like, and that will fit their class, or they may have more depending on what their rolls were. Something like that is specific armor pieces, so the player can only have one type of armor piece equipped to each individual part of their body, so one head piece, one chest piece, one leg armor, etc. These will all have their own individual stats. Which brings us to the item attributes. They'll have weapon damage, physical damage, their weight, their magic damage in the case of staves or maces in the case of clerics, armor and magic penetration for boss fights. Bosses will have, and enemies will have armor. So we have a UML diagram here, just of items. We'll have an item template class, get name, get quantity, get weight, and we'll have the name, quantity, weight, which are standard to all items. But then each individual item will break down and have different characteristics or aspects, especially in the case of rare items, which I haven't included in this, but rare items can sometimes have effect chances. The player's inventory will be able to hold up to 16 items. They will be able to use a command, equip, and then equip the corresponding item name. I've decided to make weapons unique, so once a weapon is equipped by a player, he then cannot remove it unless he has a new item to equip. When an item is removed, it is deleted. This gives the item um, the attribute of being unique without having to write any soul binding code. The vault will be present in is the secondary option of the shopkeeper. The vault is common to all characters, so anything placed into the vault can be removed by any character, so long as the weapon has not been equipped by a player previously. This can be used for trading purposes or for storage. So the parser will work in the translate function. It'll filter out the different commands from 0 to 32 and 127, so they can't use those. It will also look for the standard commands that would be in the game and to filter out inappropriate language and usernames. So these come from the connection handler, which will have the attributes to handle, enter, leave, hung up, and flooded. So handle the data, enter it, or hung up or flooded functions will stop the players from spamming or overloading the system or using commands they shouldn't. So then the players will log on, entering their username, password, etc., all being passed through the parser. So these will all go through the connection handler. And so will the chat system. They'll all go through the handler. The users are added from the logon from the user database to the chat, and these will go to an individual user. So we have a bit of pseudocode here for finding bad language. It's the same one as we did in class. The whisper function will also be included. So we have the list of available commands that the parser will look for. Yeah, there's going to be obviously more commands in game, but just for the purpose of chat systems, these are the commands. Should the server crash, since I'm implementing time-based events, I would like to see if I can get the server to try and reload itself, or failing that, should the server crash, it will only be able to be restarted by myself or by an admin or God user. So the game will use a logger. The logger will timestamp, date stamp, and put a string of the event that occurred. This will log all the chat during the game for review purposes to see if somebody's trying to abuse the chat system or abusing other players. The game will also log when a boss is being defeated and when a player will respawn. Enemy attributes will be the same as the player. Bosses will have 2 new attributes, Rend and Stun, which will work the same way as critical strike chances for the players. Rend causes the target to bleed, so they'll just take a periodic damage over a few turns, and a Stun, which will disable the target from attacking next turn. Enemy spawns in their specific rooms, so different enemy types will be unique to enemy rooms. The enemies are loaded from file until they reach maximum capacity, and then they will spawn every 2 minutes once one has been killed and the room is not at maximum capacity. After 20 minutes, all will respawn regardless of how many players are still in the room, or regardless of how many are killed. They will respawn back up to their maximum occupancy. So here we have the combat system. Multiple players may attack the same enemies, but enemies may only attack a single player. This is based on their threat attributes. So just going through the pseudocode here, this is for an enemy attack. The enemy will get what room they are in. They will get what room the players are in. And if they match, if there are players in their room, they will search through the players to find the one with the highest threat value. If there's none, it'll randomly generate a player to attack. Damage is then calculated and then removed from the hit points of the player after being checked for a crit. Then it'll send a message to all players in the room that an enemy has dealt damage to what player and how much damage, the same way that player combat will work as well, player versus enemy combat. So we said at the start there are going to be special rooms, which are the boss rooms, as bosses only respawn every 2 hours. The second way is the starting area, which will have the King's Flame and the Shopkeeper. King's Flame is a level up area, and the Shopkeeper, which breaks into two parts, the shop itself and the vault. So these all derive from a room template, taking in their data north, south, east, and west, so predefined integer values for movement. They'll have the enemies currently in the room and the maximum amount of enemies available to be in the room, as well as a name and a description to print. So all rooms will inherit from this room template and will be added to a room database. The additional functionality that I would like to implement if I have time is party creation, so multiple players playing together and loot is distributed using the need or greed function. The need or greed function allows players to select need and a random roll is made if they really need the item. And need has a higher weighting than greed. A greed roll of 100 will lose to a need roll of 2, as the need roll will always be prioritized over the greed. I would like to possibly implement achievements, so if the player kills a boss, they will receive an achievement for killing that boss. If the boss is made harder, they will receive an achievement for killing the harder boss. And the final thing is Blessing of the King, which is a buff to the player's stats for 1 hour if they manage to kill the king boss. We have the special text colors, so these are the different text colors I'd like to have during the gameplay. White for player speech, red for dealing damage, pink for whisper, green for healing, and blue for the player dealing damage. So as far as game architecture goes, we have the basic library, socket library, thread library, telnet, and the logon handler. Then we have this UML diagram here. So we have a socket which breaks down into two separate pieces, which is a listening socket and a data socket. So the listening socket will just listen for connections all the time across a range of port numbers. The data socket will actually do the connection and handling of these connections. So you can see we've got the standard connect, send, receive, close functions for this, and then we have our connection itself, which is taken from a slide on Moodle. And then we have the listening manager. So we have the listening manager, which will manage the list of sockets, which will each have their own manager and their own set. So this is my game document. This is my idea for the game. Obviously, the additional attributes may seem a little bit, maybe a little bit over scope, but I'd like to see how much I can get done, especially on my own, to see what I can come up with. So thank you.